What made you believe in the paranormal? I never believed in the paranormal until I met her. It was 2 a.m. and I was driving down an empty road when I saw a woman standing by the side barefoot in a white dress. Her head was tilted down, her long black hair covering her face. I slowed down, rolling down the window to ask if she needed help. But before I could speak, she looked up. Her eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to swallow the dim light of my headlights. My chest tightened as an overwhelming sense of dread paralyzed me. I slammed the gas and sped off, my hands trembling on the wheel. I watched in the rearview mirror as she grew smaller in the distance. But then she smiled, a wide, unnatural grin stretching across her pale face. I looked forward, trying to shake the image from my mind, only to feel an icy breath on the back of my neck. The car swerved as I screamed, nearly crashing into a tree. When I turned around, she was gone. But the air was still cold. And in the mirror, where my reflection should have been, there was only her. Since that night, she lingers in my dreams. Sometimes when I wake up in the dark, I hear a whisper right next to my ear, "You shouldn't have stopped." I used to laugh at ghost stories. I thought they were just tricks of the mind, until the night something laughed back. I was house-sitting for a friend, an old Victorian home that creaked with every step. Around midnight, I heard a soft giggle coming from the upstairs hallway. I froze. The house was empty. Or at least, it was supposed to be. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, creeping up the stairs. The giggling grew louder, childlike, echoing through the walls. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached the top. The hallway was empty, except for a small wooden rocking horse at the end. It was moving, back and forth, slowly. Creak, creak, creak. Then, right behind me, a voice whispered, "Do you want to play?" I spun around, but there was no one there. Just an open doorway leading to a dark room. My flashlight flickered. The air turned icy. The giggling didn't stop. It was coming from inside the room now, getting closer. I ran. Down the stairs, out the door, into the night. My friend later told me no children had ever lived in that house. But every time he comes home, the rocking horse is always facing the door, waiting. When I was 10, my grandfather told me a family secret. The shadows in this house aren't always yours. I thought he was just being dramatic, until the night I saw it. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed something strange in the mirror. My reflection was normal, but my shadow? It wasn't moving with me. I raised my arm. It didn't. I turned my head. It just stood there frozen. Then, slowly, it tilted its head, as if studying me. I ran to my bed, pulling the covers over my head, heart pounding. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. But eventually, exhaustion won. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up gasping. The room was ice cold. My door was open, though I had closed it. And at the foot of my bed was my shadow. Only it wasn't on the floor. It was standing. Tall, featureless, darker than the night itself. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. It leaned closer, its hollow face inches from mine. Then in my grandfather's voice, it whispered, "It's your turn now." The next morning, my own shadow moved again. But ever since that night, sometimes it lags behind, watching. I was 11 when my little sister Emily drowned. It was a tragic accident, or at least that's what they told me. A year later, on the anniversary of her death, I woke up to the sound of dripping water. At first, I thought it was the bathroom sink. But as I sat up, I realized the sound was coming from the closet. I hesitated before opening the door. Inside, everything was normal, except for a small, wet footprint on the floor. I barely had time to react before I heard it. A soft, gurgling voice whispering, "Why didn't you save me?" My heart stopped. That was Emily's voice. I turned on the light, expecting to see nothing. But then, I noticed the mirror. It was fogged over as if someone had just stepped out of a hot shower. And written in the condensation in shaky little letters was one word: dive. The door slammed shut behind me, the room filled with the scent of chlorine. I couldn't breathe. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, like I was sinking underwater. And just before everything went black, I felt tiny, wet fingers wrap around my wrist. I woke up gasping on the floor. My room was dry. The mirror was clean. But my wrist? It was ice cold. And to this day, I still hear dripping water. Every year on the same night. When I was a kid, my mother always told me never to answer if I heard my name at night. I thought it was just an old superstition, until the night I broke the rule. I was staying at my grandmother's house, an old cabin deep in the woods. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was the wind. But then I heard it clearly. A voice. My mother's voice. "Come outside, sweetheart." I sat up, confused. My mom wasn't there, she was miles away. I looked out the window and that's when I saw it. A tall, shadowy figure stood at the edge of the trees. It had no face, no features, but it knew my name. "Come outside," it whispered again, this time from my doorway. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I pulled the blankets over my head, heart pounding. The whispering turned into scratching, long, slow scrapes against the wooden door. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The next morning, my grandmother was silent. Then she finally spoke. "You heard it, didn't you?" I nodded. She just sighed and said, "It knows you now." I was babysitting my neighbor's son, a quiet 5-year-old named Oliver. He was a sweet kid, polite, never caused trouble. But that night something felt off. At around 9 p.m., Oliver was playing with his toys when he suddenly froze. His eyes widened, his little hands trembling. "What's wrong?" I asked. He pointed to the dark hallway behind me and whispered, "She doesn't like you sitting there." I turned, my stomach twisting. The hallway was empty. "There's no one there, buddy." I forced a smile. Oliver shook his head. "She's watching." I laughed nervously and tried to brush it off. But then, his toys started moving. By themselves. Tiny cars rolling across the floor. A stuffed bear slowly turning its head toward me. The air grew ice cold. Oliver's face went pale. "I think you should leave now," he whispered. A chill ran down my spine. "Why?" His little voice trembled as he said, "Because she's standing right behind you." When I was 16, my best friend Jake died in a car accident. A week later, I got a text from his number. "Hey, I made it home." My blood ran cold. His phone had been destroyed in the crash. I told myself it was a prank, but something inside me knew it wasn't. That night, my phone buzzed again. "Come outside." I stared at the message, my hands shaking. Then a photo came through. It was a picture of my house, taken from the driveway. I ran to the window, heart pounding. The street was empty. But as I turned away, my phone vibrated one last time. "I'm not in the driveway. Look behind you." I spun around. My bedroom was dark, except for my mirror. There, in the reflection, was Jake. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He smiled, raising his hand in a slow wave. But the worst part? My reflection didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me and smiling back. I worked the night shift at a hotel. Most nights are quiet, just me and the security cameras. But last Friday, something happened that I can't explain. Around 3 a.m., the elevator doors opened on their own. That wasn't unusual, faulty wiring, I figured. But then the camera feed glitched. When it came back, someone was inside. A woman, dressed in black, long hair covering her face. She stood completely still, facing the camera. I checked the guest list. No one had checked in that night. I picked up the phone to call security, but then, she moved. Not normally. Her head snapped up, her body jerked forward like a puppet on strings. The elevator doors closed. I switched to the lobby camera. The doors opened again, but she was gone. I replayed the footage over and over, trying to understand. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. When the doors first opened, for a split second, there was a hand on her shoulder. But no one else was there. When I was 8, my dad told me never to sleep with the closet door open. He never explained why, just that I had to keep it shut. One night I forgot. At around 2 a.m. I woke up to the sound of breathing. Slow. Not mine. I froze, staring at the ceiling, too scared to move. Then I heard it, a soft creak. My closet door inching open. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then, I heard footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Something was in my room. A cold whisper slithered through the dark. I've been waiting. I yanked the covers over my head, heart pounding. The breathing was right next to me now. Close enough to feel. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The next morning, my closet door was shut again. But the floor? Covered in dusty footprints. I never forgot to close it again. I never believed in the supernatural, at least not until that summer. It was a hot, sticky evening when I found the old journal hidden in the attic of my family's cabin. It belonged to my great-grandfather, a man I'd never met, but whose name was often mentioned in hushed tones around the dinner table. The journal was old, the pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was almost illegible, but I managed to make out fragments of the stories he'd written. At first, it seemed like nonsense. Talk of strange noises, whispers in the night, things that moved when no one was around. But then, one entry caught my attention. It was a warning: don't stay past sunset. Whatever you do, don't go into the woods when it's dark. The things that wait there, they never leave. I chuckled, thinking it was just a tale to scare children. But then that night I began to hear the whispers. Low, unintelligible voices coming from just outside my bedroom window. I figured it was the wind, but it was so clear, so deliberate that I couldn't ignore it. I looked outside but saw nothing. A few minutes later, the whispers grew louder, closer. Then the sound of footsteps. Someone was walking through the trees right under my window. I should have locked the door. I should have stayed inside. But my curiosity got the best of me. I grabbed a flashlight and crept outside. That's when I saw them. There were figures, tall, thin, almost transparent, with faces that seemed to shift every time I blinked. They moved silently, their feet never touching the ground. One of them turned toward me, its hollow eyes meeting mine. It smiled. But it wasn't a smile, it was a grimace stretching too far, too wide. "You shouldn't have come," it whispered. I've always lived in the same house, a small cottage on the outskirts of town. It's always been quiet, peaceful, until recently. It started with strange noises. Soft tapping on the windows, the sound of footsteps in the attic when no one was up there. At first, I told myself it was just the house settling, old wood creaking, the wind playing tricks. But then the tapping grew louder, more insistent. One evening, I came home to find the front door ajar, though I was certain I had locked it. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest, but everything seemed normal. Until I reached the stairs. There, on the second step, was a single muddy footprint. I knew no one else had been in the house. I'd been at work all day. And yet there it was. I decided to investigate, starting with the attic. As I climbed the ladder, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I hesitated at the top, staring into the darkness, but I forced myself to step inside. That's when I heard it. A voice, low and raspy, whispering my name. "Come closer." I turned, my flashlight trembling in my hands, and there, in the corner of the attic, I saw something move. A figure, crouching in the shadows. It was pale, gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long. The face was obscured, but I could see the faint outline of eyes, black, hollow, empty. It didn't speak again, but I could feel it. It was waiting, watching. I turned to run, but as I reached the ladder, the footsteps echoed behind me, too fast, too close. I never went back upstairs. I sealed the door, but I can still hear the tapping at night. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I feel a cold breath on my neck, a whisper that says, "I'm still here." I was always told that old houses had their quirks, that creaks and groans were just a part of their charm. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered in that abandoned mansion at the edge of town. The place had been vacant for years, but when I found the key, curiosity got the best of me. I'd heard rumors, whispers of strange occurrences, people saying they'd seen things in the windows at night. So, with a flashlight and an uneasy feeling in my stomach, I decided to explore. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the smell of mildew and decay filling the air. Inside, the house was frozen in time, every room coated in a thick layer of dust. But as I moved through the corridors, something felt off, like I was being watched. I wandered into the living room and stopped dead in my tracks. There, in the center of the room, was a full-length mirror. But it wasn't like any mirror I'd ever seen. The glass was fogged, with strange markings etched into its surface, and it seemed to pulse with an unnatural darkness. I moved closer, my breath quickening. And then I saw it. In the reflection, there was someone standing behind me. I whipped around, heart racing, but the room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was still there, a woman, her face obscured by long dark hair. She was staring right at me, a twisted smile curling at the corners of her lips. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned around, but again there was no one there. The mirror, however, had changed. The woman's smile was gone. In its place, she was mouthing words, but I couldn't hear them. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut. The air grew heavy, suffocating. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move as the reflection in the mirror slowly reached out toward me, its fingers stretching further and further. "Don't leave," it whispered. If you enjoyed this creepy tale, don't forget to subscribe for more paranormal stories. Stay tuned, things are not always what they seem.